The Feast of Our Lady of Lourdes is this week, February 11th. As we know, Lourdes is one of the great healing shrines of the world, and the healings that have taken place have been verified by the strictest medical standards by the board there at Lourdes, the permanent board in place that judges the truth of the miracles that have occurred there. There are very few fully approved, 60 some, I think, out of thousands who claimed some kind of healing. Only 60 some have been officially given the seal of approval. So we call upon our Mother Mary, Our Lady of Lourdes, who always chooses the humble and the lowly and the hidden, Bernadette being a perfect example of the surprises that God always chooses to place before our eyes to make us humble and grateful. So we'll begin in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. We'll simply pray the prayer together. O lovely Lady who appeared to Bernadette, Mary, Blessed Virgin, and Mother of our Lord, let our eyes too see your beauty and hear your voice, calling us to pray for sinners, calling us to come to you with our prayers, and to wash ourselves clean in the water you provide through Jesus your Son. O Immaculate Conception, so pure, so full of grace, cleanse all our sickness from us. Let us be immersed in the bath of purity that washes us of sin, that makes us whole in the sight of God. If we had but innocent hearts, we would see you. We would remember the blessing you are to all faithful souls. Oh, let us come to you and find the grace we need today. O Mary, conceived without sin, pray for us who have recourse to thee. O Mary, conceived without sin, pray for us who have recourse to thee. O Mary, conceived without sin, pray for us who have recourse to thee. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.
Amen. All right. Thanks for having me. Hold on, let me find the thing. Actually, I probably don't even need it. I'll just go forward from here. Thank you for having me. They told me that if I turned out the lights, that I might be unusually dark on the video footage, but that is not a problem for me. I'll blend right in. So I am Ashley Fernandes. I'm not a Hispanic woman. And the name comes from, there's an area of India that was colonized by the Portuguese. St. Francis Xavier is the patron saint of India. And his body is still in Goa, which is the area where my parents came from in India, which has a very large Catholic Indian population. So when people converted to Catholicism, they took the only Christian names they knew, which were Portuguese last names. So that's how I got the Fernandes part. And the Ashley part, still not sure. It's like that Johnny Cash song, Boy Named Sue. There's plenty of Ashley Fernandeses out there who are Indian and male. And I just happen to be one of them. Okay, so I'm going to talk about courage in medicine today. And one of the things that I wanted to talk to you guys about is this picture. This is not a typical picture that you would think of when you think of courage, particularly in medicine, but I like it. You can tell that this is St. Peter. It's one of my favorite lessons from Scripture because it really speaks to the situation that we're in now. I'm going to read this. This is from Matthew 14, verses 25 to 32. Meanwhile, the boat, already a few miles offshore, was being tossed about by the waves, for the wind was against it. During the fourth watch of the night, he came toward them walking on the sea. When the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified. "It's a ghost," they said, and they cried out in fear. And at once Jesus spoke to them, "Take courage, it is I. Do not be afraid." Peter said to him in reply, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come into the water." And he said, "Come." Peter got out of the boat and began to walk on the water toward Jesus. But when he saw how strong the wind was, he became frightened and, beginning to sink, he cried out, "Lord, save me." Immediately, Jesus stretched out his hand and caught him and said, "O ye of little faith, why did you doubt?" And after they got in the boat, the wind died down. Those who were in the boat did him homage, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God." So today, I think for those of us especially that are in medicine, we have to be like St. Peter. We have to think of ourselves in this situation. The world is dark and stormy, and those in the boat with him, like many of us today, are afraid. And Peter sees the Lord, and with courage, hope, love, and faith, he steps out. He steps out of the boat. It's not a sin that he was afraid when he got into the water. Fear made him lose his faith for a bit, but the story is more poignant and redeeming when you think of Jesus' response. Peter stretches out his hand. Jesus stretches out his hand to Peter because he reaches for the only person that he knows can save him. So Jesus chides him a bit and says, "Oh, ye of little faith, why did you doubt?" But Jesus' response is to draw him to himself. So when we think about the situation we're in medicine, we should be contemplating images like this. They are for us. And this is a great one. Christ, in his own patience and love, hears Peter and hears his prayer. So, Reclaiming Surrendered Ground, which is the title I chose for this, it's a provocative title. Okay, it's not that we are discovering ground in bioethics. It's that we're reclaiming, which implies that we used to have something which we have lost. Bioethics itself is a new discipline. And medicine is not. Okay, medicine's an old discipline. So let me start by saying this, that I think that Catholic physicians, truly Catholic physicians, have been practicing ethical medicine long before bioethics was ever a discipline at all. That's a fact. And bioethics is itself a derivative discipline. It relies on something else. It's analytical, if you will. It relies on something else. It relies on the action of others in order to itself be a discipline. I have a Ph.D. in philosophy with a concentration in bioethics, but to be honest, I'm not that impressed with that. What I'm proudest of is the fact that I'm a physician. That is where you are really seeing people, and you are really touching people, and you are really interacting with people in the way Christ wanted you to be. There's nothing wrong with bioethics, but we should realize that in order to think about the moral foundations of bioethics, you have to think about the moral foundations of medicine. Bioethics is a dependent discipline, and it's dependent on something far more important, which is the nature of medicine itself. It's practice, it's action that's crucial. So, for reclaiming surrendered ground, we have to talk about what ground are we surrendering. And whatever it is, it has to be deeper than medical ethics. We're really talking about, when we think about the surrendered moral ground, we're talking about moral foundations. And if it's moral foundations we're talking about, then it's something which every person in this room, not just the physicians, but nurses, the families, the spousal supports, the kids, it's something everyone, the priests, the religious, everyone has a crucial role to play. Because if we have lost moral foundations, we need to reclaim them in order to reform medicine itself. So, I'm going to talk about three ways in which I think, three problems, if you will, that I think have eroded moral foundations. One is what I call a being problem. The second is a thinking problem, which has to deal with the problem of relativism. And the last is a doing problem, which has to do with our apathy, society's apathy, if you will. So how about surrender? Well, if you think about surrendering, that can happen for a variety of reasons. It can happen because people don't care, but it can also happen because people try to do their best. They try to fight for something, but they're just overwhelmed by the forces that are arrayed against them. So have we surrendered moral ground in medicine? And I think, if you just think about that question for a second, I think the answer is obvious. But we've not just surrendered in a political or social way. We need to take a hard look at how medicine has changed and what we've surrendered specifically about the profession which we love. So let's think about this. For those of us that are in medicine at all, whether you're a nurse or whether you're a physician or a PA or an NP, I think we can acknowledge that our patients as a whole probably love us less. They demand more as their right. There's a record burnout, lack of self-care, declining incomes, especially for those who teach, do research, or do primary care. I do all three of those. Administrators and government bureaucrats demand quality, but then they place barriers in the way of compassionate care. Those who have never practiced medicine seem to be the ones telling us how medicine ought to be practiced. And as society has changed, societal values have changed, regulatory and statutory pressures build to force us to violate our consciences in order to even call ourselves doctors. Our medical students and residents, as brave as many of them are on the defense. They're in hiding, like the disciples in the upper room. And physicians, even Catholic ones, tell their kids not to go into medicine, which I will get to in a little bit. I mean, this is something which we really need to think about. That if we love this profession and we want to fight for it, then we need help. We need to help each other, and we need to not give in to the forces that are around us. So, I want to start with this being problem. Okay, if you think about, I'm going to get philosophical here, so just a warning. I'm going to try to make this simple, but I think you guys will know. I'm going to talk philosophy, but I think when I start explaining it, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. So, the being problem I'm talking about is a surrender of philosophical anthropology. It's a big word, big two words, but it's not a big deal. It just means the study of the nature of man. Okay? If you think about any problem in medical ethics today, whether it's abortion, physician-assisted suicide, issues of social justice, all of these revolve in some way around the nature of the human person herself. Medicine has traditionally been conceived as something which is a service for the good of the person. And this is Edmund Pellegrino. There's a pointer on this. Yes, Edmund Pellegrino, my mentor, talks about four goods. The spiritual good of the person, the good of the person as a human being, that is his or her flourishing, their biomedical good, which is the medical problem that they have, and then the person's own conception of the good. Now, traditionally, for those of us that love medicine, this triangle should be flipped around. If you think about the priority of what we want, the good of the person, their spiritual good should really be on top. But in today's medical system, it's actually flipped the other way. The most important thing medical students are taught is, what does the patient want? What do they think is good for them? And the next thing is, okay, well, it's the body is just flesh, and it's got a problem. So the next thing is the biomedical good. And sometimes it just stops there. These two things, the good of the human as a person, that's very controversial. It's controversial in postmodern philosophy. It's also controversial in medicine. People don't believe that there's something that connects us all, that we all have the same nature. That's very, very controversial. And of course, spiritual good. If you say spiritual, it's not too bad. But if you say Catholic or religious or anything like that, woo, that's bad. But you can see where we are. For we Catholics, we believe, yes, there is a true nature to the person. We're all different, but we're all connected by the fact that we are created in the image of God, and hence we have a nature as a person. Look at all these images here. No matter how different they are, a Catholic person will still say that every image on this screen is a person. These are persons. But not everybody would think that. And the problem is a twisted or disordered philosophical anthropology. Now, this is kind of a crazy slide. So let me explain. The nature of the person, which we conceive of as Catholic people, competes with another model. And that model, particularly in medicine, is what's called the positivist empiricist model. Sometimes it's called just a materialist model. And my mentor describes it this way. Extrapolations of science's materialist premises produces a bioethics measured by the good of the body or the species, for that is all there is. Mind, soul, emotion, spirit, All are simply epiphenomenon of matter. There is no reality beyond what we can touch, see, feel, or smell. Okay, that is the materialist premise. And in medical schools today, and in practicing, for many practicing clinicians, that is literally all there is. All you are as a person is a random collection of atoms. And when you die, you're worm food. Now, if you believe that, that's it, then think about all these different things, the nature of suffering. Why should you suffer unnecessarily? Because when you die, you're worm food. I mean, if that's what I believed, I might be tempted to kill myself too. Not now, but when things got bad. So the materialist premise is really important to kind of call out. That's what a lot of opponents of the things that we believe in think. And in medicine, that's what you're taught. All there is your physical body. So, when you think about things like our religion or our spiritual nature, for people that believe that, spirituality is not part of the human person. It's not. All that's part of the human person is what you can touch, are sensory things. So spirituality is a funny hat. That's why I use this image. It's a funny hat which man puts on to help him to do other things. Oh, he's sad, so he goes to church and then he feels better. But it's not an integral part of who you are. And if that's the case, then when it comes to practicing medicine, if there is a conflict between what a patient wants and what your religious or philosophical beliefs state, you take off the hat, because it's not a part of you, it's not essential to who you are as a person, you put it aside and you go in there as a unencumbered person. That's the nature of this competing model. In this model, choice becomes the central unit of value. For those of you that don't know, unfortunately, this is Gloria Steinem, and unfortunately, she was the keynote speaker at my graduation, because she's from Toledo. I know. It's painful. Painful. But anyway, choice on this model becomes the central unit of value, because all of your dignity as a person is boiled up into your autonomy. That's it. So if your autonomy is hindered in any way, then so is your choice and so is your dignity, and that's all it is. Because if all you are is worm food when you die, then choosing, not choosing the good, but choosing is the only thing that really matters. Then you have these conflicts between faith and science, or between the idea that someone could have a religious belief that conflicts with the standard of care of medicine. This says, meanwhile, Jesus and Darwin were fighting again. I don't know, we're Catholics, so we don't even have to say that Jesus and Darwin ever fight. It does look like Jesus is winning here, though, to me. And then you have ethical standards that are placed by secular organizations on different bodies of the medical field. So, for example, in my field, in pediatrics, we have the American Academy of Pediatrics that periodically puts out these statements that we are supposed to believe about a variety of things. And here, when they talk about conscience, it's clear they're calling out religion as the problem. This says, the surge in legislative activity surrounding conscience clauses represents the latest struggle with regard to religion in America. Should the public square be a place for the unfettered expression of religious beliefs, even when such expression creates an oppressive atmosphere for minority groups? You can see the language that's being used, and this is from the New England Journal of Medicine. Now, I tried to publish a response to this, and of course it was rejected. Oh yeah, you're not going to publish that. But then what happens is, when people go to the medical literature to look for, well, does anybody support conscience protection anymore? They don't find anything. So then they say, it's a circular argument. You see, they go, wow, the medical literature doesn't support this at all. That's because there's already a selection bias. This is from the AAP Committee on Bioethics, the beloved AAP Committee on Bioethics, which I'm a part of the AAP, but listen to this. Physicians generally can refuse to perform actions they consider medically inappropriate. Conscientious objections are typically based not on medical knowledge, but on moral, religious, or political beliefs. The ability to refuse to provide a service or treatment on these issues or other bases is not part of being a physician. How they have framed the conscience issue is completely wrong. It's wrong. I mean, I don't think we should be afraid to just say they're just... I mean, I don't know who was on this committee at the time. Actually, I do. But I don't know what they were on, I guess I should say, when they wrote this. But it's ridiculous. This idea... So let me give you a concrete example. If you were against abortion, for example, you are not, and you're a physician or a nurse, you're not against abortion simply because Jesus says killing is wrong. That's true. Jesus does say killing is wrong. But from a medical point of view, it's a bad idea. It's a bad idea for the woman who gets an abortion. It's a bad idea for the unborn child who dies. There's no medical good coming out of death for an unborn child. So you can argue that that is a conscientious objection based on a medical reason, and also a moral reason, and also a religious reason. I think this is just ridiculous. Most of the conscientious objections that I know about are based not simply on a moral or religious reason, but on both. There's always, and this is the beauty of God's creation. If God says it's bad, it's probably bad for a good number of reasons, and some of them are medical. This is a very famous Oxford University bioethicist who says if people are not prepared to offer legally permitted, efficient, and beneficial care to a patient because it conflicts with their values, they should not be doctors. There. It's out there. That's what they really want. That's what they really want. And now it's getting worse. This article came out the summer before I gave my talk in Orlando. They don't want to call, if you don't want to do abortions or you don't want to prescribe contraception, you're no longer going to be called a conscientious objector because that sounds too good. Now it's going to be called dishonorable disobedience. So not conscientious objection because that makes you sound like you're noble. But now it's going to be dishonorable disobedience. Now, I don't look worried. I'm not worried about this. I still think that this is a battle that can be won because we are on the right side of things. This is St. Pope John Paul II, who says in Fideis et Ratio, I love this sort of analogy that he gives. He says, he's talking about the resurrection, but he says the Christian notion of the resurrection is the reef upon which the link between faith and philosophy can break up, but it is also the reef beyond which the two can set forth upon the boundless ocean of truth. Here we see not only the border between reason and faith, but also the space where the two may meet. So when you think about faith and reason, or faith and science, yes, there's a clear border between their two different disciplines. Faith is not science, and science is not faith. But wherever there is a border, there is also a place where two things meet. I mean, think about it. And that is a space that is ripe for opportunity, for thinking of things in different ways. So I'm a personalist. A personalist philosophy of the human person posits ultimate reality and value in personhood. This is it is not the Catholic view, but it is a Catholic view. Human, this emphasizes the significance, uniqueness, and inviolability of the person, as well as the person's essentially relational or communitarian dimension. Now, if you think about everything you've learned from Catholicism about how important the human person is and about the dignity of the person, it boils down to this. The human person is a whole and an open and generous whole. And Jacques Maritain says, in truth, if human society were a society of pure persons, the good of society and the good of each individual person would be one in the same. So John Paul II, when he was a philosopher, he writes about the human person as one who acts. And he says that you can identify what the human person is. Now remember, this is competing with that materialist model I told you about. By thinking about the characteristics of the person themselves. And he says, first of all, a person is a person who thinks, i.e. has a rational nature. But, unlike in Kant, and here I'm going to quote John Paul II, human thought does not create its own world of concepts and judgments distinct from reality. Rather, a person is created precisely in extracting truths from reality. So, what you choose is not true. It's not always true. But rather, John Paul II is that what makes a person is the fact that they can access truth which exists beyond the person themselves. There's a metaphysical reality which we have access to. And when we think and when we use our rational nature, that's what we're doing. We're grasping at the objective reality of truth beyond our own choice. Sometimes our choices, therefore, can be wrong. On the materialist model, you really can't say that. You can only say they're wrong arbitrarily. But here, if the nature of the person is to grasp for the truth, then you can be wrong about your choices, and becoming a good person involves choosing the good. So he says, secondly, a person is a creature who acts in freedom, but this is not merely freedom to choose. So John Paul II develops this notion of a person as a notion of freedom as tethered to the truth. It is only when you choose the objectively true thing that you become better. Third, he says, is a person who loves. And loving another person, I mean, think about it. Animals don't love. They can show affection, but they don't love in the same way a person does. It's part and parcel of human existence. And in loving, we actually change ourselves. We become better, and we continue along the path that we were meant to be as persons. And finally, and I think this is really important for medicine, no person exists in isolation. John Paul II posits this sort of, and the Catholic Church posits a radical notion of the human person. It's so different than what we see in society, many parts of society today. It says that the nature of you as a person is communitarian. It's relational. You can't be a person by yourself. You can't just choose what makes you happy, because that goes against your nature. What makes you happy is related to what makes others happy in a community. And that's not just a choice that you make. That's not a social construct. That is something which is part and parcel of your ability to be a human being. Now, what does this have to do with conscience? Well, if the nature of the person is such as one who thinks, who acts in freedom, who loves, and who lives in community with another, then conscience cannot be the little voice inside one's head. In medicine, we call that schizophrenia. Saying that conscience is the little voice inside one's head is basically saying that you can think whatever you want. I hear people who talk about, disagreeing with the church on this thing or that thing. Usually it's contraception. Well, my conscience, I follow my conscience first. Well, conscience is not just thinking of it really, really hard. Conscience, what refines conscience is whether or not you are grasping for the objectively true thing and whether you have searched for that objectively true thing. So conscience is more than just a little voice inside one's head. It's intimately tied to truth. That is, it's normative. It tells you what you ought and ought not to do. It's an active force which affects your character. This is huge. Think about this. We all talk about wanting to be good. The fact that we're using that word, be, is metaphysical. And it's real. The person that uses their conscience over and over and over again and does the right thing, even in the face of other choices, becomes better. We use that expression. They become better. And yet we also see on the other end people who seem to be very evil. Like think of evil people. And we say, gosh, that person has no conscience. We just use that phrase. It's quite accurate, actually, because what happens is, as you do worse and worse things, or as your conscience becomes dulled to what is true, it's like having blurry vision. You find it harder and harder and harder to reach out and to see the truth and to act on the truth. For medical students, this is really important, right? Because the minute they start giving up on their moral values, the minute they start saying, well, I'll let this one slide or I'll let that one slide, it becomes more and more dull. And then by the end of 4 years, they're finding it very, very hard, very challenging to be able to do the right thing. So when we think about medicine, we have to think about this in the context of the physician and patient relationship. The patient is just like us in this way. We are both persons. The physician and the patient are both persons. And they come together in this covenant of mutual obligations and trust. The patient doesn't have some extra bit to them which makes their choices more important than yours as a physician. When you put on the white coat as a doctor, or you're in the room as a nurse, you didn't give up your personhood or any part of it in order to do that. In fact, the act of being in medicine is helping to fulfill your personhood. It should be something which fulfills your conscience, not which puts it on the back burner. And that is how philosophical anthropology will affect ethics. Because on this materialist or positivist model, people are free to decide for themselves what to do with their bodies. Caring becomes non-interference with the choices of another. How many times have we seen that? Live and let live. Why don't we just live and let live? That is what becomes caring on this model. Whereas on a personalist model, on the Catholic Church's model, your freedom transcends choice. And freedom is not choosing, but choosing the truth in love or communion with another and for another. And if we can do that, then the person becomes or actualizes, he becomes what he was created to be. So the acting person, not choice, becomes the central unit of value on this model. And if you think about these two models, you've got the materialist model and you've got the personalistic model. Which is better? Which is better? Which makes more sense with the experience of the world? Does anybody really want to think that the only thing that is good is what you choose? And I think if you pose this to even people that oppose the church, it's not pleasure, not reason, not choice that is the ultimate unit of value, but the person herself. And that truth of the value of the person is revealed through human acts. Now I want to go back to this professor, Dr. Salviescu from Oxford University, and just look at what he says again. So he says, if people are not prepared to offer legally permitted, efficient, and beneficial care to a patient because it conflicts with their values, they should not be doctors. Now look what I underlined and crossed through. Okay? The fact that it's legally permitted, that something is legally permitted, is totally irrelevant. As we can tell, there are many things in history that have been legally permitted that were just wrong. You can always ask, it's legal, but yes, but is it good? You can always ask that extra question. But the fact that he's saying that it's efficient or beneficial care, that is the problem. That's the problem with this statement. It's sort of a tautology, I guess you'd call it. What we are objecting to, when we object to something like abortion or contraception, is whether or not this is truly, it might be efficient, but it's not beneficial. So you can't define your terms in this way. The objector's reasons are both moral and medical. And when people disagree with me on this, I just ask them to perform a thought experiment on conscientious objection. And just, ask your friends that don't agree with you on this. What kind of doctor do you really want? It's just a very simple question. Do you want a doctor who says, I know what I think is best for you, but because you want something different, I'm going to give you what you want instead of what I think is medically best and morally best for you? Or do you want a doctor that may inconvenience you, but says, look, I care about you, I want what's best for you, I know you want this, but I don't think that this is what's best for you, or for your unborn baby, or whatever the circumstance may be, and I can't give it to you, I'm sorry. And I think if you ask that question and people are honest, they would prefer the second doctor, because that's the doctor that actually cares. It may inconvenience you, but it's the doctor that actually cares. These are my two kids when they were a little younger. But this look of trepidation, okay? That's what we have to think. That's the image I want you guys to remember about you and your conscience. You got to protect it. You got to wrap your arms around and protect it, because our right to have a conscience that is informed by our faith is really under fire now. All right. Second problem is a thinking problem. And this is the problem of moral relativism. I'll try to go a little quicker here. This is an interesting story, okay? I gave my medical students this scenario. And I asked them, they all had these little clickers so they could choose the right answer, okay? All right, now I know there's some little kids here, so just plug your ears for a second. 35-year-old patient, John, comes to your office for STD testing. Okay, and he turns out to be positive for chlamydia. Okay, he's positive for this thing. He's been married for 10 years and has 2 young daughters. And his wife is also a patient of yours. So his wife had disclosed an affair about a month ago, and then he recently had an affair with an old flame as revenge. He tells you he doesn't want to tell his wife about this, and he doesn't want to give up the affair either. He just wants an antibiotic treatment, and then he'll be on his way. So I asked the students, well, what do you think of this scenario? And the first choice says, what John plans to do is neither right or wrong. We can't pass judgment on his actions. Right or wrong could change in the future. 6% of them said that was the right answer. What John plans to do is understandable for someone betrayed, and although wrong for people in faithful marriages, it's okay for those who've suffered infidelity. 12% thought that was the right answer. What John plans to do is right for him, but obviously wrong from his wife's viewpoint. 27% thought that that was the right answer. What John plans to do is wrong no matter who does it. 55% said that was the right answer. Now, before we get all excited about the 55, the majority of my students thought that this was wrong, 45% of them embraced some form of moral relativism. So let's talk about the first one, the first mistake, which is cognitive relativism. Now, people believe this. They will say there's no such thing as right or wrong. There are no universally valid truths about the world. I'm not going to spend very much time on this. This is one of the few things that I think is just so dumb that we don't need to spend much time on it. So I'm just going to tell you how to just knock it out of the park, and then we don't need to talk about it anymore. A person that says there is no truth is what we call in philosophy self-referentially incoherent. Makes it sound really important, right? But basically, if you say there is no truth, that is a proposition itself which is meant to be taken as true. And if that proposition is true, then it falsifies the earlier proposition that there is no truth. Because there's at least one truth, which there is no truth, which means that you get it. Which means that there is, the statement's false. And I mean, I can't even explain it because it's so dumb. But people still cling to it, they still believe it, but we don't even need to spend any time on it because I really don't think people live their lives this way, even though they'll say it. Cultural relativism is far more prevalent, and this says that you really can't say what's right and wrong because different cultures do things differently, and we have to basically be tolerant of all cultures. Okay? So the problem here, it confuses anthropology with ethics, right? Because saying that something is not the same thing as saying something ought to be. You can go to a different part of the world and you can describe something which happens. Oh, well, you know, they have polygamous marriages in Africa. Okay, but is it good? So you can always ask that extra question. That's the problem. It's a confusion of anthropology, which is descriptive, with philosophy or ethics, which is something prescriptive. So I give these examples of Hitler, like if you're a philosopher and you can construct a really good Hitler analogy, it's kind of like philosophical checkmate. So Hitler, you couldn't really criticize if you're a true cultural relativist, because you would have to say that, well, you know, the Nazis, they have their own culture, and how can we judge them on what they were doing? And nobody really wants to be put in that position. The other thing is reformers would always be wrong. Reformers of society would always be wrong on that. Now, subjectivism, which you could see just from my little informal poll of the medical students, says that each individual has his or her own truth. So this is even a stronger version of moral relativism. This is basically saying morality is in the eyes of the beholder. But if that is true, then morality becomes useless, right? If each person has their own truth, then no judgment or argument is even possible. Everything becomes preference. Killing is wrong. Oh, I just don't like killing. I just don't like it. But if you think killing is okay, that's okay. I mean, it doesn't really make any sense, and I don't think anybody lives their life this way. So this is the follow-up question that I asked my medical students, okay? I said, all right, you give John an antibiotic for his condition, and you insist that he informs both partners, and you remind him that the law requires you, as the doctor, to report his infection to the Department of Public Health, and now he wants Viagra prescribed to continue his affair. And he has a reason to have it, he thinks, and he has no other health conditions that would warrant you not prescribing it. So I asked the students now, he's going to continue his affair, and now he wants this medicine, Viagra. Would you give him the Viagra? 73% said they would. 27% said no. And this is even though 55% of them had just said in the previous question they thought what John was doing was wrong. Even though they thought it was wrong, they would still permit him or allow him or help him to continue his affair. So you can see the kinds of things that we're up against when we're educating our students. All right, the last thing is a doing problem, and I just want to quickly go through two cases that are both true. A 12-and-a-half-year-old girl comes into the clinic and discloses she's been trying to become pregnant by her boyfriend, who is a freshman in high school. Two teenage girls, cousins, are brought in by the guardian for contraception, i.e. the depot shot. The mom doesn't want the kids to, quote, make the same mistake that she made. Neither girl wants it, one because she's had intercourse and regrets it and wants to abstain until marriage, and the other says because of her past experiences, more than 10 partners, she's now a lesbian and doesn't need it. This is a totally true case. It happened in my clinic. So these are cases which are very challenging, obviously, for a pediatrician like myself. But they're also cases which speak to something else. The girls in these cases are suffering because of things which people have done to them and things which people did not do enough for them. So the second case was handled by a pediatrician in my practice who basically browbeat the two girls until they received the depot shot. That's how it was handled. And she was very proud of herself, this pediatrician, for saying, see, that's how you get a case done in 10 minutes. She was very proud of herself. The caring was completely absent. It was a completely apathetic response to the real suffering that these girls had. And that is a problem, a rampant problem in medicine. The word apathy itself comes from this Greek root that means an insensibility to suffering, unfeeling. Okay? And apathy can be caused by not caring enough, like the secular world. Okay? But apathy can also come from good, faithful Catholics. One, because sometimes we fear suffering ourselves. We even have shame. I mean, how many of you are scared of what your colleagues would think about you if they knew that you were a believing Catholic? Sometimes apathy happens because we have an anger or a loss of hope. To some extent, my father is like this. You know, he's practiced medicine for almost 40 years, until he was like, I'm done with society, I'm done with this. Okay? Anger or a loss of hope at the way society has gone, that can be apathy. But what are we going to lose if good Catholic physicians and healthcare workers retreat? What are we surrendering if we do that? Well, if we surrender, then we are giving up the I, we are in the other. We are giving up the goodness of the person that we were brought here to help heal and to help protect. Remember that freedom is a free act directed toward the good. And in acting freely and acting for the good, we are experiencing that other I. We are experiencing the incommunicable other, and we experience ourselves as free. And it is only through doing this that we grasp the value of the human person. I get a lot of medical students who are trying to get into medical school on the admissions committee that say this stuff like this. I really want to be a doctor so I can, help people and stuff. And a lot of our ideological opponents are kind of like this. The way they think about the pediatrician that browbeat those two girls into getting the depot shot. Okay? That's a pediatrician that might be able to claim that was a good thing. It's a good thing for society that happened. Because those girls are going to go out and go wild, and they need it. These are people that love humanity in the abstract. Or they claim to love humanity, but it's in the abstract. That's people loving, and that's hard. I mean, that's easy. But person loving is hard. Loving the individual person, the patient at the bedside, and being ready to follow them wherever they might go, that's hard. That is the challenge of a Catholic physician. We are seeking a commitment to loving persons, not people en masse. So let's review. I've kind of reviewed these terrible three things, these problems, how they feed on each other and overlap with one another. If you have a disordered anthropology in which metaphysics is banished, it means that truth is also banished, right? So moral relativism, in turn, that second problem, is what allows your conscience to be defined as the American College of Obstetrics and Gynecology defines it as the private, constant, ethically attuned part of the human character. Conscience is private without truth. then the flames of apathy are fed when your own choice becomes the supreme value rather than freedom realized through a personalistic love oriented toward others. These three things feed on one another. If you start to believe one, you will start to believe another as a logical consequence of believing the first. And so it goes. So, I'm going to give you some practical steps that I think we can do to reclaim the surrender down. For those of you who are Lord of the Rings fans, this is like one of the greatest scenes in the entire film. It can seem, from what I've told you, that these terrible problems have created kind of an impenetrable wall. But all walls fall, and all can break. Some by blunt force, but maybe that's not our time now. But some foundations are crushed by the drip, drip, drip of water which seeps through the cracks and expands and continues and allows room for others. This is a quote that my dad gave me. My dad used to speak Latin, believe it or not. I'm not going to try to pronounce this, but the translation goes like this. This is from Ovid. Dripping water hollows out stone, not through force, but through persistence. And for we that are Catholic physicians, dedicated Catholic physicians now, maybe this is the approach that we have to take. We don't have to smash through walls all at once, but being ourselves, being truly Catholic in our own way, where we are, in the fields where we are planted, clearing the fields where we are planted, as Tolkien says, right? That might be the way that we can best show our resistance to this culture. Drip, 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 drip. I mean, look at this room. If every single person here recommits to living out their Catholic faith in their way, their practice, in the way they live their family life, that alone will make a huge impact, not just here, but throughout the country and the world. And so let's talk about this. The first thing is we need to renew our faith. Okay? We need to know it, feel it, be it. I was very blessed with a family which took an intellectual approach, I guess, to Catholicism, and that was a very good thing. I knew arguments. I knew what the church taught because my parents taught me, and if I didn't know something, go read it. Go read about it. And then I would read about it. I mean, that's a good thing. But it's also good to be it and live it and feel it. You have to have that part. You have to let what you know animate your life. So, if St. Pope John Paul II is right, then the experience of the person leads to truth. Then we have to evangelize, not through words, but through our very being itself. And that comes with prayer. The next thing, we have to make Catholicism and Catholic ethics attractive. Okay? Attractive. Not sour, not angry, not bitter. We have to be nice. Be really, really nice. That's easy. I said this at the Orlando conference. I'm going to say it again. How many times, do you know how many times I have been absolved of my stupidity from my wife by just being charming? I mean, but our secret weapon is not stupidity, it's truth. And I think that truth with a smile goes a lot farther than truth with a snarl. So even if they don't agree with you, they'll kind of get confused. Because they like you. They're like, what? How can I, It's one of those things, I mean, you see it in our young priests. Our young priests, this generation of priests, have become some of the best evangelizers for Catholicism because they approach it in a joyful way. This one right here. If they don't convert, they'll at least get confused. And I think that's a good thing. Now, the next thing is we got to be reasonable. Okay, we have a reasonable faith. If you're reasonable, if you're rational, then people will start to really realize, wait a minute, I thought these people were all crazy. But if you can present what you believe in a reasonable and rational way and be that way yourself, again, you've already, make that your modest goal. When I speak to secular audiences, I don't really look to try to convert them to anything. I just want them to I just want to make them think that I'm not crazy. I mean, if you can get them to that point, if you can get someone to the point where they don't think you're a crazy Catholic, they're halfway there. They don't know it, but they're halfway there. Oh, well, maybe they're not as crazy. That's a really, really good thing. What you want to be able to do, what we have to be able to do, is to make people realize that Catholicism is not the thing that says, no, 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 no. Catholicism is the thing that says yes, 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 to the way in which God wanted you to be. It is not the thing that binds. Catholicism is the thing which frees, not the thing that binds. It's the thing that frees you. And the more people know you and like you and realize how reasonable and rational that is, the better off we will all be. I think we also all need to be patient. Okay? The most profound stories in the gospel, for me, are those about the repentant sinner and Christ's personal investment in them. So there will be people that disagree with us, and this is something that I struggle with, is that element of being patient. A lot of us have been blessed with faith and have been blessed with the ability to, even to be able to pray. And some haven't. And we have to be patient with those who don't believe what we believe. If you think about those parables, this is the good thief parable. I mean, these are really powerful, amazing stories. You talk about the patience of Jesus Christ, how he is with sinners. Or you think about the parable of the lost sheep. I was that lost sheep. I was the one who was gone. And Jesus leaves the 99 as the good shepherd, and he goes to find the lost sheep. We have to be that patient. We have to be that patient. And I want you to think about those same stories and how in every one of those, it is Jesus or the father in the parables who comes to the sinner. Right? Even the parable of the prodigal son, the gospel writer makes a point of saying the father sees him and goes running out to meet him. He doesn't wait. He goes running out to meet him. And the same thing is true with the parable of the good shepherd. Jesus comes to the sinner. We have to be patient, and we have to be like the good shepherd and go out to meet them where they are. The next thing is we need to hope in Christ. The world is not ready. It's not ready to be left behind. We have to reject the talk of inevitability, no matter what has happened. I know even in this state where marriage has come under assault, it's inevitable. This is going to happen everywhere. No. The world is not ready to be left behind. And forget the inevitability talk because it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. People are now fond of saying in Catholic circles, well, let's just, if they let us do our own thing, we'll be okay. Just let us be Catholic but that's not the way it's going to happen. Do you think for a minute that even with all the conscience protection in the world, that secularists are going to leave you alone? This is a specifically Catholic hope, and we have to be ready to create it. We have to be able to volunteer for hospital ethics committees as a community member. We have to be ready to volunteer for admissions committees. We have to be able to speak up when other people put down Catholicism, not stay silent. Even just saying a word, if people make hey, don't do that. That's not cool, man. That's what I tell my students. Hey, that's not cool, man. Just say that. The person who said the bad thing will think twice about saying it again, and then you've won a little battle. But be able to speak up, create hope where there is none. Create truly Catholic hope. All right. The next thing we need to be able to do is get our Indian on. Hold on, let me see if I can do this. Let's see if this works. Shoot. That took me 2 hours to try to put in that. I'm just kidding. So let me explain this. I say this partially in jest, but we need to be able to get our Indian on. So let me tell you about my family. My mom and dad, I have 4 brothers, so they're 5 boys. They gave us a choice between 4 excellent careers. A doctor, a lawyer, an engineer, or a priest. 4 is that's a good number of choices for a kid. All right, and in my family of 5 boys, 3 of us became doctors, 1 became a priest, and 1 became a lawyer. The one who became a priest, by the way, was in medical school and left to become a Catholic priest. He's now the dean of the Archdiocese of Cincinnati's seminary. There are 35,000 Indian doctors in the United States. 10% of all physicians in the United States are Indian from a group that has less than 1% of the total population. Now, I say this Because I kind of am starting to believe this. Why can't we as Catholics get our Indian on and make our children, or really encourage them, to go into medicine? It's a good, if they don't want to become a priest or a nun, that's fine. So give them that choice first. All right? But after that, medicine is a fine profession. It's a good profession. And there's nothing wrong, here's my Indian, just pushing them a little bit. You like science? That's good. Why don't you become a doctor? Okay, here, let me let you follow around to this doctor. So that's what my parents did. And I think we need it. We need to infiltrate the medical profession again with good Catholics who are willing to sacrifice and who are willing to bring their love of the person into our field. For those of you that are physicians, you can do the same thing. You can mentor one person, one student, one undergraduate person, one high school student that is thinking about going into medicine, and show them the joy of being in medicine. People ask me, I'm in primary care, which is a really tough field to be in, especially pediatrics. But I was telling someone yesterday, I have hard days in practice. Hard days. Long days. I think every doctor here does. But I never have a bad day. Because when I'm with a patient, I can communicate for my 20 minutes. I see a lot of poor, underserved patients in the inner city in Columbus. And for those 20 minutes, I can create a safe space, a space where they're shown love, a space where they're shown patience. I call their mom and dad sir, if the dad's even there, but I call their mom ma'am, the dad sir. Those are ways in which we can communicate the love of Christ to our patients in simple ways. And my goodness, if you have a medical student or an undergraduate or a high school student that's following you and watching you do that, that will impact them in ways that you have no idea. They will realize medicine is still a good thing, a thing which Catholics have to be involved with. Okay? If your child doesn't want to become a priest or a nun, there are lots of other good careers you can push them into, like medicine. Just make sure they become doctors, that's it. All right, that's all I'm going to say about that. Then the last thing is, we all need to practice Catholic love. Karol Wojtyla, Pope John Paul II says, the person is the kind of good toward which the only proper and adequate attitude is love. Now I want you to look at this picture. This is from encyclopedia.com. This is a picture of a child. If you type in mental retardation, this is the picture that comes up. And the caption says, cretin child. Now, if you look at this child, you've got to be unnerved by his surroundings. But is there anybody in this room who is repulsed by this person? Is there anybody who says, this person is too much of a burden for us, costs too much, brings us too much suffering, should have never lived? Okay? How many of us here, on the other hand, would care for him, love him, and do so for any person born with this or any other disability? That is love as only a Catholic physician, a Catholic person can love. That is totally radical, countercultural, and that is what we need to bring into medicine. This is Catholic love. This is not the love that says this kind of life is disposable because of the kinds of things that they can do or can't do. We shouldn't be ashamed of Catholicism. We don't need to hide because of our Catholicism, because of this, because of I know everyone in this room, how you would react to this person. That's something to be proud of. That's something that no one else can claim but us, and it's something that we have to bring into medicine. So finally, courage. Jesus says, I am the light of the world. He who follows me shall not walk in darkness, but shall have the light of life. My students asked me when I left Wright State to go to Ohio State, some of my students were like, what's the most important thing you felt like you taught us? Or, one of them asked that. And that was this. I think that we have to remember that between good and evil, there is no safe space to stand. If you think for a minute that if you can just withdraw or hide somewhere or be somewhere in the background, that other people will do things for you and that things will all work out, it won't. There is no safe space to stand between good and evil. If you withdraw your light, if you choose to stand in the shadow, there's no vacuum. Darkness fills the space where you were and where you should have been. And that's probably the most important thing to remember in all of ethics, is if you have light, you need to show it, because something else always will take its place. This is a quote from C.S. Lewis. Courage is not simply one of the virtues, but the form of every virtue at its testing point. And so we've come to it finally at last. We've spoken up to this point about the positive things we can do, not by retreating from our Catholic faith, but by embracing it. By not retreating from the battlefield because we think hope is lost, but by kindling hope where there is none, by loving the vulnerable person and even our vulnerable enemies as only a Catholic can. But there's more. To succeed in our endeavor to reclaim the moral foundation of what is lost, we have to have courage. This is what C.S. Lewis is talking about, that's intrinsic to every virtue properly practiced. And we have to be prepared to stand alone, even though we know we are not alone. We have to be able to pray for the grace to act and speak, and to be unafraid to act and speak when we're called upon to do those things. Make no mistake, loving your enemy will not make them strike you less. Loving the vulnerable patient will make them want to strike you more. But I'd like to end my thoughts with courage in medicine by reading an excerpt from a sermon by a bishop of Munster. This is the Blessed Clemens August von Galen, who was beatified by Pope Benedict in 2005. This sermon was delivered in 1941 from the pulpit in Munster at a time when Bishop von Galen was surrounded by the evil of Nazism, not just figuratively, literally surrounded by Nazism. And he had the courage to speak against the Nazi racial doctrines and euthanasia of the disabled. In 1941, during this sermon, Bishop von Galen, from the pulpit, spoke these prophetic words. And think how much they apply to our society today. This is what he says. Become hard, remain firm. We see and experience clearly what lies behind the new doctrines, which have for years been forced on us, for the sake of which religion has been banned from our schools, our organizations have been suppressed. There's a deep-seated hatred of Christianity, which they are determined to destroy. Become hard, remain firm. At this moment, we are the anvil rather than the hammer. Other men, mostly strangers and renegades, are hammering us, seeking by violent means to bend our nation, ourselves, and our young people aside from their straight relationship with God. But we are the anvil, not the hammer. But ask the blacksmith and hear what he says. The object which is forged on the anvil receives its form not alone from the hammer, but also from the anvil. The anvil cannot and need not strike back. It must only be firm. Remain hard. If it is sufficiently tough and firm and hard, the anvil lasts longer than the hammer. However hard the hammer strikes, the anvil stands quietly and firmly in place and will long continue to shape the objects forged upon it. But what is being forged in these days between the hammer and the anvil are our young people, the new generation which is still unformed, still capable of being shaped, still malleable. But the anvil also plays a part in the forging. Let your family home, your parental love and devotion, your exemplary Christian life be the strong, tough, firm, and unbreakable anvil which absorbs the force of hostile blows, which continuously strengthens and fortifies the still weak powers of the young in the sacred resolve not to let themselves be diverted from the direction that leads to God. Remain steadfast and firm like the anvil, but also ready at any time to act in the spirit of supreme sacrifice in accordance with the precept, men must obey God more than men. Through a conscience formed by faith in God, he speaks to every one of us. Obey always without any doubt in the voice of conscience. So my friends, we must be the anvil for Christ, our brother, who gave his life so that we might live. We must be the anvil for the good shepherd who would leave the 99 to follow any one of us when we are lost. And we must never, ever, 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 ever give in order to become the persons we were born to be. That's all I have to say.